Good morning. It is nice to be part of this year's Science Symposium. Before beginning, I would like to thank my co-authors for their contributions to this presentation. My name is Mary Harner, and I'm speaking today from south central Nebraska near the Platte River, where I work at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. I earned a PhD in biology from the University of New Mexico and have deep connections to the Rio Grande in this region. The Platte River, shown here, shares characteristics with the Rio Grande, including in appearance and water governance. The Platte supports 4 federally protected species, the anterior least tern, whooping crane, piping plover, and pallid sturgeon. A cooperative agreement guides the implementation of recovery plans for these species and their habitats. Research in our lab focuses on ecological and social themes within and across these 3 river systems. We use various tools to observe, analyze, and make meaning of these places. Today I will highlight ongoing work on the Middle Rio Grande. Rivers and floodplains are among the world's most biologically productive and diverse ecosystems, but they are also among the most threatened. The upper Gila River, shown here, is one of only a few rivers in the United States that retains a near natural flow regime. Urban areas are often built near rivers, and most of the world's large rivers have been altered to sustain people. The Rio Grande has long supported biological diversity in human life and has been modified to reflect changing needs, values, and visions for its waters and surrounding lands. Our work considers how humans have modified and interacted with the Rio Grande around Albuquerque in recent time, focusing on how land cover has changed since the 1930s, places where people may access the river and its surrounding land, and the importance of open areas for human well-being. For this project, we focused on the Albuquerque Reach and surrounding lands and acquired photography dating to the 1930s. We delineated land cover and compared past and present-day images. The dates and original sources of aerial photographs used in our study are shown here. Images were taken at different times of the year and under different river flows. The population of Albuquerque grew dramatically during this period, increasing from fewer than 30,000 people in 1930 to more than 500,000 people by 2010, with growth accelerating after World War II. From above, this is what some of that growth looked like on the landscape, comparing 1935 and 2018. Present-day bridges are shown for reference. For this project, we took a wide view of the riverscape, extending from present-day Coors Boulevard on the higher elevation West Mesa to Rio Grande Boulevard in the river valley as the eastern boundary. We delineated 3 types of land cover, focusing on river channels, generally open areas, and built or developed areas. This is the 1935 image with land cover classified by student McRody. The blue shows a relatively wide river channel. However, levees and drains had already disconnected the river from portions of its floodplain. The green shows open land cover that included native vegetation on the West Mesa and along the riparian corridor, and agricultural fields in the valley. Visible development, shown in tan, included the bridge, a track in the lower right image, and the riverside drain and levee. By 1973, built land cover had expanded through the area, and Interstate 40 was present. This image also shows river channelization that occurred in the 1950s. The 2018 image reflects the contemporary view of the river and shows development that has continued on the West Mesa and continued conversion of other open areas to built environments. Of note is the remaining ribbon of green within the levee boundaries, and this complex of mixed undeveloped areas extending from the Oxbow across the river to Candelaria Farms. Graphically, these changes look like this. Here, the vertical axis is the percent of total area in the study region, with blue bars representing the river, tan, built land cover, and green, generally open areas. Overall, the areas of water and open lands declined, and built areas increased from less than 5% to more than 60% of the cover between 1935 and 2018. These changes have had far-reaching consequences, including loss of habitat, severed connections between the river and floodplain, and changing ways people interact with this space. This is a view of what some of the open areas on the east side of the river looked like in the 1930s. The type text was on the image from the archive. The present site of Central Avenue Bridge is in the foreground, and the edge of the track that was visible from the aerial photo is shown with the arrow. The riverside drain and levee are visible, with the text "Reclaimed Riverbed" showing separation of the river from the floodplain. This was a time when river management focused on flood control, drainage, and irrigation. Taken over 20 years later, this image shows school kids in Albuquerque looking at a relief map of the river as part of an exhibit by the Bureau of Reclamation for river projects in the 1950s, during a period of continued modification to the river. And while much of the native and agricultural open areas have been converted to a built environment along the river at Albuquerque, the community has also embraced protecting open space. This map shows the Rio Grande Valley State Park that extends along both sides of the river. The 4,300-acre park was established in 1983 and is cooperatively managed by the Open Space Division and Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. The focal area of our study is here and is about a quarter of this expansive, publicly accessible part of the river. Here I'm going to highlight 5 places where people can interact with the river in the heart of Albuquerque: the San Antonio Oxbow Overlook, the Rio Grande Nature Center, Pat Baca Open Space, Central Avenue Bridge, and Tingley Beach. This is a view from the West Mesa overlooking the San Antonio Oxbow wetland, with downtown Albuquerque in the distance. The Oxbow is one of the last remaining wetlands within the levee boundaries within the Middle Rio Grande and is home to a diversity of species, notably birds. This pair of images shows how the present-day Oxbow in the upper left was the main river channel in 1955. In the late 1950s, the river was straightened and channelized. This created deep, fast-moving water not conducive to native aquatic species like the silvery minnow that were adapted to conditions more like the river on the left. Across the river from the Oxbow is the Rio Grande Nature Center. The park was established in 1982 following more than a decade of efforts by citizens to recognize wildlife, recreational, and other values of the river. At the Nature Center, viewing blinds provide places to observe birds and other wildlife, including scenes like this, and nearby trails through cottonwood forest like this that lead to river views. For more than 20 years, researchers from UNM and participants in the Bosque Ecosystem Monitoring Program have been studying this and other riparian forest. In conversations with Cliff Dahm about the history of biological research in the Bosque, Cliff has described how more people realize the Bosque is a special place in the central part of New Mexico because of the educational program that Cliff Crawford and Manuel Moles established here. Moving downstream and back up to the West Mesa, this is a view from the Pat Baca Open Space, looking east over the golden leaves of the cottonwoods toward the Sandia Mountains. From here, looking downstream toward the Central Avenue Bridge, this is what the view is like today. But nearly 90 years ago, this would have been the view from this location. Emma Brindley Buckley relocated this photo point. Moving downstream toward Central Avenue Bridge, one may see a scene like this. John Fleck, whose bike is shown here with the Central Avenue Bridge upstream in the background, often takes people to the river access point at this bridge. Here he describes how our relationship with the river as humans is defined in part by the bridge and what came before it as a place where people could cross, and how there is an interconnectedness among the human population, culture of the city, and the river that happens here. John often also talks about the science that takes place in this area, such as long-term monitoring of river flows from the United States Geological Survey gauge at the Central Avenue Bridge. This graph shows the peak annual river flows at the Central Bridge, with records here dating to 1942. High flows of the early 1940s created conditions conducive to recruitment of much of the native riparian vegetation that is habitat to species like the southwestern willow flycatcher and others. However, since completion of the upstream Cochiti Dam in the 1970s, peak river flows have been diminished, reducing the hydrologic connectivity between the river and its floodplain. Just downstream of Central Avenue Bridge is Tingley Beach, shown on the right side of the river in the 2018 image. This area too has changed across decades, most recently becoming part of the biopark and renovated in 2005. Tingley Beach provides access for public fishing, among other activities adjacent to the bosque. Becky Bixby and colleagues recently developed an educational kiosk about algae at Tingley Beach. Algae are a foundational resource in the Rio Grande food web, including for the silvery minnow. This sign describes different kinds of algae, their functions, and what contributes to algal blooms and how blooms are managed, helping to increase public understanding of algae as people walk or bike by the sign. In summary, I hope that this presentation encourages you to take a broader view, in time and in space, of the Rio Grande, including the interactions of people with the river. As you go about work that is focused on species and habitat in this landscape, also remember the beauty that remains here to be experienced. As a quick note, in preparing this presentation, I read a paper that was published in August about health benefits associated with urban green areas. The authors examined patterns in Google Trends related to activities that people can do in urban places. They found a sudden increase in the search "Go for a Walk" globally in mid-March 2020, corresponding to lockdowns in many countries. Inspired by their approach, I examined search queries in Google Trends in the United States for the past 5 years. The search "stay at home" increased abruptly in March and April 2020 during closures associated with the pandemic. At the same time, searches for "go fishing" increased, and this is something that my family did a lot of early on in the pandemic. Similarly, the search "go for a hike" increased in spring and remained relatively high throughout the summer. These are both pastimes supported by open space around Albuquerque, including the fishing access at Tingley Beach and the trails within the river corridor. As studies such as the previous paper attest, access to green spaces has physical and psychological health benefits to people, especially in urban areas. In closing, the Middle Rio Grande and its open areas have much to give, not only to the wildlife and ecosystems to which many participants in this meeting have dedicated careers, but also to the health and well-being of its people. This work was funded in part by the National Science Foundation and supported by our universities in partnership with Platte Basin Time Lapse. To see more, please visit witnessingwatersheds.com. Thank you.